Striking scenes in Hong Kong where pro-democracy protests entered their 11th consecutive weekend. As crowd numbers swell, will China intervene to quell the unrest? I'm Femi Okay.
I'm Malika Bilal and you're in the stream. Tweet us or comment with your thoughts in our live YouTube chat.
Around 1.7 million people marched down Hong Kong streets on Sunday, undeterred by rain and a heavy police presence. The pro-democracy protest was the largest in weeks, with activists estimating that a quarter of Hong Kong's population was in attendance.
The demonstration was largely peaceful, but Hong Kong police say more than 750 people have been arrested this summer since mass protests against an extradition bill erupted in June. That legislation has been tabled, but unrest continues as activists push to preserve Hong Kong's autonomy from mainland China.
Hong Kong's government said it will begin sincere dialogue with protesters once everything has calmed down. Beijing, however, is growing impatient with the protests, which officials say are hurting China's image and causing economic damage. Paramilitary troops are amassing near Hong Kong's border, and officials warned that further unrest could prompt a swift intervention. So can the government of China and activists in Hong Kong reach a peaceful resolution?
Well, joining us to discuss today's topic is Agnes Chow Ting, a leading member of pro-democracy group Demonstrators in Hong Kong.
Also with us from Hong Kong is Nixie Lam, District Councillor of the Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong, also known as DAB. And finally, we have Mary Hoy, a Hong Kong-based reporter for Quartz. We also reached out to more than a dozen Chinese officials to join this programme, but nobody was available. Thanks for joining us, though, ladies. Malika, where should we start?
Online, but the pictures of what was a really massive protest scene on August 18th. This was on Sunday. Freelance photographer Mei Ying was there, and these are a few things she shared on her feed. A woman pleads with protesters to get off of a bridge, some urging each other to leave to preserve today's peaceful protests. Another one here, this protester came to cover her with an umbrella while she took pictures because millions 1.7 million, an estimated number, were out there even though it was raining. Now, she sent us a video comment about what she saw at the protests, and here's what she told the stream.
It was really a much needed period of relief in comparison to all of the violence at the airport last weekend. Because especially when midnight on Sunday neared, people were waiting to see whether Hong Kong could get through the entire weekend without tear gas. And it almost felt like a strange kind of New Year's Eve countdown. So in the end, there was no tear gas this weekend, but it still remains to be seen whether this is a new trend or just a brief respite.
Agnes, what was witnessing those protests like for you?
Actually, I was a participant. I have been a participant of this movement from June until now, and I could say that Hong Kong people have tried different kinds of methods to fight for our 5 demands from the Hong Kong government. But until now, Hong Kong government still pretend to be not listening or could not listen to those opinions to our 5 demands, and also the violence of Hong Kong police is escalating day by day.
Nixie, I'm just wanting you to have a look at the little picture behind me. It's just going to come up any second now, so you'll see it. There you go. All of these people on Sunday protesting. Who do you think they are? Who do you know that they are?
Oh, no, they're just everyone. I have friends there as well. I think one of the things is just a big relief for me Sunday. I actually smiled after the protest because, everybody's uploading their soaking feeds because it was raining really heavily in Hong Kong, and this happy feed photo was actually online. That means everybody gone to the protest and then peacefully went home. So I was really happy to see those pictures rather than tear gas news going on. So I think it would be good. I mean, that will press more pressure for the government to rethink whether or how they should respond to those 5 demands rather than focusing on violence. So if they can continue to do this for the rest of the other arranged protests, I think it's going on a good direction.
What are your friends telling you that they were there to do? Why are they on the streets of Hong Kong?
Oh, they are very detrimental. Like, I have a lot of friends that are requesting similar requests as Agnes before as well. At this moment, those 5 demands, they're standing pretty strong. I think one of the things that, while you do have people that are standing really strong, and then you do have other friends who are saying, well, the only things that I'm requesting is the independent investigation looking into this incident. So I think there's a lot of people having different demands, but then that's meant that to have a genuine reply from the government. But I think at the moment, one thing that was challenging for the government is that this movement this time is really different from the umbrella movement a few years back. What happened is this time you don't have like a few leaders that coming out to say, okay, we represent the people, so if you want a dialogue, you can come to me. This time it's more like everybody's playing their role. Those ones that are good at doing design, they're helping out freely. Sure. And like that. So it might be hard if you're going into this like conversation, like who the government should go, or maybe they should have rounds and rounds and rounds in discussion.
Who do they even talk to? Yeah, I hear you.
But Nixie, do you think that kind of it is true that it is a leaders movement, but we haven't really seen the government really make.
It looks like we might have lost Mary's sound, and so why we tried to bring her back. I want to pick up on the point you were making, Nixie, about it being a leaderless movement. And yet, even given that, the demands seem to be pretty clear amongst protesters. So this from Eric on Twitter, who says, we as Hong Kongers stand firm on our 5 demands: official withdrawal of the extradition bill, amendments, retraction of a government characterization of the June 12th assembly named as a riot, an independent commission of inquiry to investigate police violence, amnesty for all arrested protesters, and universal suffrage for chief executive of the whole legislature. We're not demanding separation or independence in this movement. So the 5 demands are there, and they're posted many places online. Activists seem to be pretty clear on them. Agnes, he started though with the extradition bill. Talk to us about how we went from protests about an extradition bill to what we've seen today.
Actually, we fight against the extradition bill in June at first, and because if the extradition bill is passed in the Legislative Council, people could be extradited to the mainland China without, China is a country without any kind of rule of law and transparency, and it would be very dangerous to Hong Kong people and also to the system of Hong Kong, to the legal system and to the one country, two systems of Hong Kong, if Hong Kong people or even foreigners or journalists coming to Hong Kong that could be sent to the mainland China. But when the violence of the police has been escalating in these 2 or 3 months, Hong Kong people do not only demand for the complete retraction of the extradition law, but also an independent investigation over the violence of police. And also the most important thing is the democratic system, a democratic political system and universal suffrage in Hong Kong.
Mary, go ahead.
I may jump in there a little bit to provide a little bit of context. If we kind of jump back a little bit to June, we first had 1 million people march on the 9th of June and demanding that the extradition bill be withdrawn. And after 1 million people took to the streets, we really had no response from the government. And the government had insisted on pushing forward with the second reading of the bill, which was the next step in the legislative process to then eventually push it through if all went to plan. And it wasn't until that following Wednesday when when clashes happened, tear gas was fired, rubber bullets were fired, that a few days later the government said we are now suspending the bill. So it seems like the government tacitly, implicitly or not, and intentionally or not, seems to have sent a signal that peaceful protests are maybe a bit too tame for them to respond to anything. And I wonder if the government needs to take responsibility for how much the escalation has come about because of the messaging that they've put forward. What do you think, Nixie?
I think we need to also look into the incidents holistically. I mean, the government is definitely not doing well. I mean, a lot of people I know that was used to really support Carrie Lam, just like very disappointed at this moment. But I think the violent use is not only happening in July, it happens starting from the 12th of June. A lot of they were starting using like metal bars taken from the road fences, taking it off and just like battering, and then later on there's like gas bomb and this and that. So we cannot just say, well, it's just only police were using violence and not the other protesters. I think one thing that we have in common from any camp is just to stop use violence, which is why I'm so happy what's happening on Sunday. So nobody's using violence anymore, and then that it will actually be more powerful than using violence to urge, because the government can always respond to say, well, this is pure violence, I'm not going to respond to anything.
Nixie, you make a really good point. I should say that for anyone who's following the Hong Kong protests, they know who Carrie Lam is. If you're just dipping in, Carrie Lam is the chief executive of Hong Kong. Have a look here on my laptop. I recommend you follow all of our guests on Twitter, but Mary Hoy in particular has these scintillating details of what the protesters are up to, how the protests are going. Mary says here, HK Protect, the online store for protest gear, announced today that the mainland Chinese police have confiscated a certain amount of goods, including gas masks and helmets, and the owners are now raising funds so they can refund unfilled orders, and said that they are closing shop. Mary, this speaks to how prepared the protesters are and what they feel that they are going up against. Is it the police that they're going up against? Is it the police who's fronting Carrie Lam? Or is it government officials? Who are they battling right now?
I suppose really the movement has been a defensive one in the sense that it really started out with people demanding that this bill be withdrawn because they see it as an attack on freedoms and liberties. So in that sense, I think protesters have been really banding together and drawing on various different sectors of society and drawing on professional skills, as you see with this Hong Kong Protect website. I spoke to two of their members. They're all volunteers, and they've really just come in together, people working in marketing, business, IT, to put together this online store, which I'm sure we can all appreciate is complicated logistically. So I think people are kind of just banding together to try and respond to all these various needs and seeing what needs to be done rather than going towards any one particular target. And going back to Agnes's point, and Nixie's point about this being a leaderless movement, I think that is kind of the most fascinating thing for me as an observer, as a journalist observer so far, is that it is such a diverse movement, and you do see so many different sectors of society trying to chime in, and it has been truly a creative one also.
No, Nixie, you mentioned the violence being on both sides, and so it only being fair to look at that. And there are some online who are saying some group of protesters have apologized for that and have said that that is not part of their movement, or it shouldn't be part of their movement. But others say that it came after police violence. And I want to share this from Sharon on Twitter, who says, one of our 5 demands is to have an independent inquiry into police conduct. Hong Kong police have been using excessive force against protesters in different protests since June, and these need to be stopped. Do you see that happening, the inquiry into police conduct?
I think that might happen after what the normal procedures would go. I think the governments are pretty strong on, at this moment, on various occasions when they come out to talk about this point, is basically on what we have a current system on looking into the police force, any complaint that they have a little, not like a bureau, but they have this commission to talk about that, as to go into look into this instance and negotiation or investigating that. So I think the government are pretty standing strong on going on this normal procedure before that independent inquiry. But I think on the other side, when we're talking about protesters, we also need to look into a lot of the other Hong Kongers as well. Those who are actually against this protest. I think one of the things that they're mainly focusing on is the amnesty part. I talked to a lot of the friends, including myself, doesn't agree with the amnesty on all the protesters or all the rioters. I think at this point, as mentioned by various speakers here, a lot of the violence we use, excessive violence we use, and those ones shouldn't represent the normal protesters. And when the violence is using up to this gas bomb level, maybe amnesty shouldn't be a solution or shouldn't be one of the demands to ask for.
Yeah, I agree
Ms.
that the
Lam
demand
talked
for-
about Ms.
Go ahead,
Lam
Agnes.
talked about the normal procedure of complaining police officers, but this is actually not a realistic way that protesters or even journalists who were attacked by police could follow, because the police officers nowadays are actually often hiding their own numbers or even hiding their appearance, so that no one, even like journalists or like protesters who were being unreasonably attacked by police, couldn't identify and couldn't complain anything about police officers. That's why these kinds of so-called normal procedure to complain police officers' violence is already useless. And I think it is very, irresponsible.
Then it would be the same if you are
Lam
saying there's no numbers to reference on the policemen. Who are you going to sue for if they don't have a number? And as well, the protesters are also hiding their identities using masks and everything. I think
how could you
at this
compare
moment,
protesters and
Well, I
police? Because police are holding their weapons legally, they're holding guns legally, they're holding tear gas legally, and they
they are
use
also
the guns
legally
to kill people
response to the
illegally.
levels of violence used by the protesters.
Yeah, so
I think we have to fairly look
so
into
they
the
can't-
So
situation.
Agnes and
into
Nixie, I'm just
everybody's
going to,
house.
Agnes and Nixie,
Right.
I'm just actually going to put a pause on this for now, because without a thorough investigation and an unbiased investigation, it's very difficult to prove what you are both saying, unfortunately.
Yes.
I do want to share some reporting that Mary did with Quartz. In Hong Kong, almost everyone everywhere, including pets, getting tear gassed. Let me show you how some protesters are dealing with this. Fascinating to watch this online. Thank you, Mary,
Yes.
again for sharing this. So you don't even have to be able to read all the details of this. You just have to be able to watch it. We have a tear gas canister. Protesters approaching. It's a very creative approach. Fascinating tactics about how they are dealing with how the police are dealing with them. Mary, as you're reporting all of this, how would you sum up the police's approach right now?
I think undoubtedly we have seen a large amount of tear gas use, magnitude, orders of magnitude more than what we saw in 2014. And residents, people who've just been caught in the fray have had to take in tear gas, right? And I think there is a very, very valid question there as to whether police really need to use this much tear gas and whether it is achieving any of the intended effects, because the protesters that they are looking to disperse no longer respond to tear gas because they've all got masks. And so at that point, I think a lot of people being affected are the elderly. Hong Kong is a very compact, densely populated place, and so it ends up seeping into homes, getting into eateries. It does add to the tension and spills over beyond just the protest site. So I think undoubtedly there is a lot of fear and anger being felt by everyone, and the kind of what we've seen is the government saying everything needs to return to normal, to kind of peacefully, orderly manner of things before dialogue and an independent inquiry can happen. But perhaps there's a bit of a chicken and egg issue there, because we do see tensions escalating because there is no dialogue, and the government is saying we can't have dialogue until tensions are fully have fully cooled down. So I think there needs to be some kind of, at least some kind of show of faith, I think, from both sides. And so far, I think we've seen the very, very peaceful march this past Sunday. I think that has been a show of faith from the protester side. We haven't quite seen the same from the government, because the kind of immediate response given in the statement has been that the government regrets this public activity organized on Sunday that was characterized as an unlawful assembly because technically there was no permission granted for the march, and also the government and the police expressed regret that the march kind of targeted in its slogan police misconduct. So we're not seeing very much action,
Right.
I don't think, in response, and I think that's what's needed to push things a little forward and take it away from.
Interesting point that you made about the negotiations, because we're hearing that from people online too. So I want to share two comments, one on Twitter and the other on YouTube. This is Troy on Twitter, who says, you only negotiate with a party who has almost the same power as you do. But in this case, Hong Kong is not China's equal. Therefore, China will be stooping so low if they negotiate. I believe there won't be any negotiation. So keeping that in mind, we got this live on YouTube. Robert says, I still think China was playing the long game and knew that eventually China would take Hong Kong and get rid of the one country, two systems. That's, of course, the system that is in place now. Agnes, keeping in mind those two comments about negotiations and moving this forward, where do you see them going?
I would say that the government keep escaping from their responsibility to solve the very root political problem that is created by actually the government and Carrie Lam themselves, and it is actually to respond and to listen to the 5 demands of the protesters that is actually very, very clear that we advocated from June until now.
I want to add, before we wrap up this conversation, a very unusual press conference, a media conference that was held by the Chinese ambassador to the United Kingdom. These press conferences are very rare to take questions, rare to have those questions answered in English. So bearing that all in mind, this happened last Thursday and perhaps gives us an indication of what might happen next. Have a look.
The central government of China would never allow a few violent offenders to drag Hong Kong down a dangerous road, a dangerous abyss. Should the situation in Hong Kong deteriorate further into unrest, uncontrollable for the government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the central government would not sit on its hands and watch. We have enough solutions and enough power within the limit of basic law to quell any unrest swiftly.
Mary, enough solutions. What could those solutions be?
I think there's been a lot of strong signaling from the government, from the Chinese government, and relatedly, the People's Liberation Army. They've sent out at least 2 promotional videos now showing the paramilitary and the military quelling these riots and protesters. I think at the same time, it seems to me that it will be a very, very costly decision for China to make to send in any troops. Not to mention that there are already troops stationed in Hong Kong, and they have been there for years now. So I think it seems to me that a lot of this is, if I might say, saber rattling and sending a strong signal that there is a capability for China to send troops, but it would be a very, very costly decision for everyone involved.
Sure. Malika.
This from H.G. Flores, who says, it's in Beijing's interest to keep these protests about the extradition bill rather than the overall status of Hong Kong within the Chinese state. Otherwise, they risk this protest becoming an independence movement, which is an interesting point. And Nixie, in just one sentence, because we're almost out of time here, is it too late? Is this already an independence movement?
I think so, definitely. We see a lot of amnesty autonomy, like those black anarchy flags going on. They're taking off the Chinese flag.
No, it is not the independence movement. It is not the independence movement.
I mean, look into
the 2 sides of the coin right there.
Please,
we are just
fighting for you guys are actually proving for independence movement.
Malika, see what you started. We will finish it online. You'll find Malika and I always online at AJ Stream on Twitter. Thank you, ladies, for being with us today. See you next time. Take care, everybody.